It's a long way from Plainfield, New Jersey, and New York City to St. Paul and Minneapolis, but jazz is an international language, crosses all kinds of boundaries, including regional dialects. And one of those who speaks for all of jazz, whether it be Montreux, Switzerland, or Monterey, or the Newport festivals, or intimate bistros, is Bill Evans, who has been listening to audiences from his position at the keyboard, and he's still in the world of acoustics. And I was just thinking, when you were growing up around Plainfield, New Jersey, what were you listening to, Bill?
Not too much. We were very close to New York, about 30 miles from New York, but somehow it might as well have been, a great deal farther. I didn't really hear any jazz. I heard classical music, but not contemporary classical music. But I developed a great respect and love for classical music and started playing it when I was 6. Then when I was about 12 or so, I was turned on to jazz and started playing jobs and so on. And started to play hooky and go into New York and hear the bands at the theaters, and when I could sneak into a bar, with a phony draft card or something, and records, and played a great deal, and with people older than myself, so I gained a lot of valuable experience, and very much was swept into it from there.
What basically was the factor that triggered your interest in jazz?
Basically, it was the factor of manipulating music on my own, as opposed to reading strictly the written page. I had played classical music from the time I was 6 and could play some masterpieces quite musically. In fact, I won a medal for playing some classical pieces when I was about 10, But I couldn't play My Country 'Tis of Thee unless I had the music in front of me. Didn't know anything about analytical theory, just intuitive, So when I got into a high school rehearsal dance band, and for the first time played something, a little blues note that wasn't indicated on the page, it was really a thrill, and began to play jobs and learn how music was put together, and being able to manipulate it, and to begin to learn how to build musical lines and improvise was really the telling thing for me. I guess I just have that kind of a personality or something that I like to do, that kind of a thing, a building thing, kind of architectural mind or something.
Have you ever thought in terms of the visual arts and, the structure of architecture as an alternative way of life?
Well, it's funny, but when you're in elementary school and a teacher asks the class, what do you want to be when you grow up, and everybody says fireman or pilot or nurse, or whatever. The one thing that came to my mind very early on was architect. I don't know why, where I got it or what, but I always have had kind of a constructive and structural liking for those things. But I never did seriously consider anything but music because I got into it, rather young, and I had a pretty good head start, and it was just a natural thing, and I loved it.
Well, the musicians around you, of course, are an influence, and if I were to mention Don Elliott, what would you say?
Well, Don was an outstanding musician around that territory in New Jersey when we used to job together in high school, and he was about the sweetest trumpet player at that time that you ever heard. And in a very short time, he had gotten into vibes. He played a little piano, and he got into vibes and going with George Shearing, and very quickly developed into a big name type jazz player, and then went into mellophone from his trumpet days. And Don and I are still quite friendly. He's gone into the recording business, but he's now, after many years of, when I was playing with him around 55, 56 in New York, he was very anxious to get out of the business. He was really sick of the nightclub scene and all that. And now, after all these years, suddenly that yearning is returning, and he wants to get back and record and start playing again. I guess once you're really, into it, you never can really put it down.
Frank Foster once said, "Once a section hand, always a section hand."
Yeah, I think so, And I brought this up in a panel once at Berkeley in California, and we were discussing the Beatles and that kind of thing, And And I brought up the fact that I didn't consider, the Beatles really what I consider musicians, because, once they had made their 5 billion each or whatever, one, went off to the farm, and one did this and one did that, and although some of them are still involved in music, but, the kind of musician that I'm talking about is the kind that, is a musician till he dies, and, and that's the way it goes. You're just really committed to it, absolutely, and in every way.
What are the disciplines that you've faced? What do you measure for yourself?
Well, I never applied strict kind of calisthenic disciplines as far as playing the piano, but I did apply a great many mental disciplines to myself as far as music is concerned, and learning concentration, and learning creativity, and learning spontaneous creativity in the jazz idiom, and it all takes a great deal of discipline. More in terms of just bringing yourself to bear upon the problem constantly. And this is the discipline. Fortunately, it was all pleasure for me, because I'm a very lazy type, and if it was something that I didn't really want to do, I never could have done it. Some people have the ability to, schedule practice and look forward to future goals and things, but I never have been that way.
Well, that's certainly a testimony to the artist and his whole approach to the idea of communication. Do you think, this is a difficult question always to ask, but for you, what is the jazz art, or the art of the keyboard, in relation to, I suppose the word is jazz?
Well, what I think of the jazz in a pure form is a sort of a mental process. It's a process of making music rather spontaneously within a certain idiom, somewhat like perhaps an extemporaneous speech, something like that, or like Zen painting, where I mentioned this in a liner notes once for an album, that jazz is something like Zen painting, and where they paint with a brush and a stretched parchment in such a way that if they deliberate too long or don't use a natural stroke, the parchment will break through, or the line will be ruined, so that they have to practice a certain discipline of a very direct connection between the conception of what you want to happen and the physical activity of doing it. And jazz is somewhat like this. It's a particular kind of process, and it's not contemplative in the sense that composition is, where you could take 5 years to write 5 minutes of music. But in jazz, of course, you make 5 minutes of music in 5 minutes, and this is really the difference. So it takes a certain kind of mastery within a certain closed area of music, which you can manipulate and move within that area in a certain language, using a certain language, and try to just express yourself within that area.
For you, Bill Evans, what is the reward in performance, in composition, improvisation, in this art form called jazz?
Primarily, it's a very personal thing. Secondarily, of course, it's recognition and material rewards and respect and all of that. But primarily, it's a personal and spiritual kind of satisfaction, especially when one knows one is doing or has done something which has exceeded in some way anything that one has done before, and you know that you've reached a level of creativity and a level of communication and so forth. That's really the rewards for me.
Finally, how do you view the development of jazz and the way it seems to be going today, its acceptance with audiences, its seeming renaissance that I seem to view from my perch right here in the mid-continent?
It's very true. It is having a great renaissance, and our audiences all over the world now are rather a heavy majority of young people that would have 10 years ago been probably, rock fans. But there's a large discriminating young audience building constantly for jazz. The college market is opening up for jazz. New clubs are opening up, and it's really obvious. We did a tour in Japan recently, and many young people, numbered in the audiences, and it's that way wherever we go, and it portends, I think, a very good period lying ahead for jazz, and there's, I think, going to be a lot of wonderful music happening as a result of it.
I've been talking with Bill Evans by way of the Longhorn in Minneapolis, and Bill, thanks so much for taking time after hours.
You're welcome, I'm sure.